Hi, I'm Brad Evans. I'm a senior lecturer in international relations at the School of Sociology, Politics and International Relations at the University of Bristol. I'm also the founder and director of the Histories of Violence project. The main points that I hope, students and faculty take away from the talks and the seminar today is to think a bit more seriously about how we would interrogate violence in the 21st century and also provide maybe a meaningful response to this. One of the most difficult and challenging questions we face in the contemporary period is how do we develop an ethical critique of violence which does justice to the subject. And I guess part of the aim and the ambition for the talks has been to get people to first of all be exposed to some of the raw realities of violence, to think seriously about how we engage with violence in the age of the media spectacle, but then beyond that to try to think about more imaginative and innovative ways about how we collectively and collaboratively can respond to violence. There's no point in just simply deconstructing violence or critiquing violence for that matter, despite how ubiquitous and inevitable it seems. I think the only purpose for really interrogating the problem of violence is if we can instill within people the idea that we can transform the world for the better. What I mean by the term intolerable violence doesn't simply refer to people's individual capacities to tolerate different forms or representations of violence. So my engagement with the question of intolerable violence deals with it both at the level of aesthetics and also the level of human emotion. Now, we're all acutely aware, of course, of the representations of violence in the mainstream media and how certain images can appear quite personally intolerable for us. My concern, however, has been to interrogate the ways in which intolerable images get put to use and recycled for the tolerance of purer forms of violence. So what I'm interested in with the concept of intolerable violence is to look at the ways in which certain intolerable images function politically. And what I mean by that is that how something which should appear intolerable to us sets the conditions for further violence and political rule. And this requires, a very serious and critical engagement with the politics of aesthetics around questions of why certain images do appear at a much broader sort of level, appear intolerable to us and others are less so, and to understand maybe the threshold between tolerable forms of violence as appear justified and intolerable forms of violence as being unjustified. The connections between violence and education are inseparable, but there's no greater challenge that we encounter today than to make the connection more meaningful between forms of violence and critical pedagogy. On the one hand, we are taught to accept the inevitability of violence today in an age of catastrophe, the ubiquitousness of violence, almost the fact that we need to even accept that violence is inevitable in the future. We might only think about recent political events to see almost the impossibility of breaking the cycle of violence. What's therefore demanded is different critical interventions, different pedagogical interventions, which on the one hand preaches more the virtues of non-violence, to get people to think more critically about the lasting significance of violence and questions of social responsibility, and how we might, counter the problematic of violence with more imaginative responses. That has to begin at the level of education.